Hi, welcome to Glug's Creative Lunch Hour. This is part of Mediatel Events' Future of Gaming event that you're watching live today. This is a pre-recorded segment, but I'm sure you've been having a really good time this morning watching all the various different things that have been coming out. My name is Pete Bowker. I'm the CEO of Glug Events, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Si Crowhurst, who is the Vice President of Vungle Creative Labs. Hi, how are you doing, Si?
Hi, Pete. Glad to be here today. Nice to see you too, albeit virtually,
Absolutely.
which is a new normal for us.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to be talking about gaming. Obviously, Vungle is a big name in the world of gaming, both as a sort of media platform, in-game advertising, all sorts of different things like that. I'll set the tone by saying that we all know that I don't know an awful lot about this, as it's been the case with a lot of these conversations we've been having. So really, you're here to tell me a bit more about what's going on, to educate and illustrate some of the things that are happening from your point of view and from Vungle's point of view during this extraordinary time.
Sure.
But I thought we'd start off, if you could just give us a little bit of background. Obviously, we've known each other for a while, but for our viewers and listeners, can you give us a little bit of background on you, your career as it's been from mobile and into gaming, and tell us a little bit about what it is you do there at Vungle Creative Labs?
Yes, for sure. More than happy to. So interestingly, my career has always been working within mobile. So when I first started, you can probably see from the grey hairs, I'm in my 40s. It was very early days, pre-iPhone. I worked for a number of different companies, including Orange, the operator in the UK, where I sort of led creative projects such as multimedia messaging and music services and things like that. And then sort of span out from there to start my own mobile marketing agency with a couple of co-founders. And that was very early. That was sort of working with on-pack SMS type promotions, if you remember those. So text this code to receive this gift. And then the internet, and then the iPhone launched around about that time, which was sort of game changing, as we all know. And that really opened up a whole new world where you're building mobile sites, mobile websites, which was very, very new. Pivoted from there to join another, my sort of move into the advertising sector, as it were, with a company called AMOB. So working on a number of different innovation sort of projects for key customers. And then came to Vungle actually 6 years ago. And that's been a big sort of growth journey, really. At Vungle, what we do is we're a performance marketing platform, and we have publishers, so app game developers, or developers as it were, that build games and look to monetize those games via advertising. And then on the other side of that sort of environment is the advertiser that's looking for people like a certain cohort or demographic, and they're looking to attract them and then convert them to be people that play their regular games.
Yeah, that's really cool. I can't believe it's been 6 years you've been at Vungle already. That's
I know.
Time has flown.
It has indeed. It really has.
So obviously a lot of people watching will know quite a lot about the gaming world, but there'll be some of us that don't really know. When we have been chatting recently, we've been talking a little bit about the scale of that market. It's absolutely enormous, and I don't think that people really yet have completely understood the scale of that market as a sort of media and publishing space, that's content that's going out there within gaming, but also how global it is. Can you tell me a little bit about just some of the numbers that are involved? We're talking billions of people that are engaged in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the Vungle, if you look at gaming as a whole, it's a massive industry, and I think it's come through some shifts of perception in terms of like who might be those gamers. Sat here with a beard and sort of sandals on right now, and I think the old sort of misconceptions of the audience are is it's heavily male and people in basements, in the dark playing games. And we know from lots of studies and lots of sort of analysis that couldn't be farther from the truth, particularly when we start to think about mobile gaming. And you might think of some big titles that are household names, such as Candy Crush, Soda Saga, titles like that from King, where that's heavily female, and older than you would think in terms of kids. It's much more in the in the midterm demographics of like 30-year-old mums playing games. So this misconception has really been a shift, which I think is super interesting. But in terms of the market, I mean, this is a creative sort of seminar, and I don't want to just come here and quote numbers and sound, you know, to devalue that. But it's something like $152 billion market, and if you look at mobile gaming's chunk of that, it's 45% of it. So that's it's quite impressive, and in particular when you see what's happened as a natural byproduct of that, you've seen like private equity and governments take interest in it and start to invest in those sort of companies that make up that ecosystem. So some of the big gaming titles have been bought by private equity funds, and then some of the companies, you know, Vungle being one to acquired by Blackstone. You've seen our nearest competitor AppLovin acquired by KKR. And you're starting to see that space really sort of move into more mainstream, and even governments like, you know, the UK trade initiatives of having a fund for gaming companies to encourage that sort of ecosystem in London, which is massive too.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, that, isn't it? I mean, you know, I think as someone who hasn't traditionally been a gamer, you know, I didn't really get into that stuff. I think back in the early 80s, I think I had one of these little fold-out Donkey Kong games when I was a kid. And that's really the last time I spent any time playing computer games. But even just, obviously not at the moment, but traveling on the tube, if you think about it, you know, there's a high proportion of the people on their daily commute who are playing mobile games, you know, in a variety of different guises. You know, it seems to be, I don't know, I would say, don't quote me on this, but a third of the people standing there, you know, listening to music, a third of the people watching one of their series, and another third of people seem to be playing games. And like you say, those are male, female, young, old, every kind of background, every kind of persuasion of person, you know. And that's surprising. That really is surprising. So then specifically, obviously, Vungle Creative Labs, you know, you guys are involved. You know, this is the creative lunch hour after all, as we said. You're involved not just in the kind of the data side of things, or the buying and strategy side of things, but actually in the creation of advertising that goes in games, and sort of gamification, I suppose, of some of those things. How long has that been going as part of Vungle? Has that been there from the start? You know, how did that come about?
Yeah, so I mean, the company founded in 2011 in London, and in 2013, the decision was made to sort of start an experiment, in essence. Like, can you blend like creativity, the composition of the ads people see, with data? Because remember, we're a performance platform, so people that spend money are really looking to track that. Now, performance can have a dirty dirty connotation sometimes, but I think it's, if you look at the particular time now we're in with COVID-19, you really see that all those eyeballs forced indoors, are really consuming that and really playing that. And you've seen, you know, I think other areas of advertising and brand world, you've seen budgets probably sort of pause at best. We haven't seen that as an industry. We haven't seen that. We've seen that continue, that spend to continue, because it's very measurable and very trackable. As it pertains to Creative Labs, so we started with that experiment, and we really do break down Creative Labs into 3 areas. So it's really strong creative talent, you know, the creative direction, art direction, copywriting of these ads. You've then got this notion of using creative tech, as we call it, the technology that powers. So simplistically put, that's removing manual repetitive tasks. So if you need to localize an ad into 1,000 languages, you don't really want to be doing that manually. So we've built an example of our creative tech is a localization. So insert language A and use the technology to filter that out and allow you to traffic many different versions of languages, and some pretty weird languages down to Swahili and things like that, which sort of drives the reach you can get, you know, globally. And then the third piece is obviously data. So, you know, I was watching your the Future of Media session. They're talking about like data can be blinding. I sort of agree with that notion. I think a right amount of data is really important. So we're always looking to, because we can see the size of our network, we can see data in real time, always just looking, is this creative resonating with its audience, target audience? Can we try some different things? Can we move some dials simplistically, you know, bring some different composition into the creativity? And it does work.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're saying, referencing that film, which was aired a couple of weeks ago, talking with Dan and Orlando, and one of the things we were talking about there is, the pure creativity and how the data enhances that or can inform it, but actually it is just that. It's informative rather than instructive, as it were. It just kind of gives you the ability to pivot, and that creativity, I know you agree, is still fundamental. That human creativity that's involved in this. That's the nature of that empathy, that level of design, that level of creative skill and talent that's gone in. That you can teach AI an awful lot of things, but it can't go for 5 years to art school, or whatever. And that really makes a big difference. So we've got a sort of series of topics to talk about during our conversation today. You'll see me sort of looking down. I have some notes here, so excuse me for that. But I've got a couple of sort of main questions really to start off with. There's a pandemic going on at the moment. It's changing the world. It's obviously in the short term changing everyone's world, in their private sense. Most of us are working from home. Most of the creatives that we're talking about in terms of designers and illustrators, animators, people who make creative stuff on computers are working from home. But actually, there's a long-reaching impact of this whole thing beyond we even getting into the conversation about whether people will keep working from home, but actually about how you do creative. So I'm kind of interested in what you think perhaps the key lessons from the pandemic for creatives across all sectors are, how our understanding of brand identity and social purpose might have changed in the light of that ongoing crisis. What as creatives should we be doing to react to that, and how is that changing things?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something we've thought long and hard about from day one. The decision to go into lockdown seemed relatively straightforward now, even though it was quite a shock at the time. I think to your question, which is how do you continue creativity and collaboration and all those bits and pieces whilst you're in this sort of time? And there's many different tidbits, and people have come up with some really creative ways to encourage that. Online collaboration tools, even if you comment, "This is lovely," into a creative piece of design, a quarter of the way through, it's that sort of social, it's that validation that you get. Similarly with these Zoom calls, I like it when people are writing chats and waving or thumbs up in terms of that, and showing that people are engaged and listening.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of like the situation we're in, it's hard to give a definitive answer now, because it's still relatively uncertain times and it is involving and in flux. But we do believe it's never been more important to get the right message to people, using the tools that we have available in which they're engaging with right now, right? So bringing it back to the gaming environment where we work, it's no lie that people are staying indoors playing more games. And in doing that, they are consuming more advertising as a byproduct of that very activity, right? And we've had a few different initiatives actually. So be it some of our advertisers, dating apps, sort of real change in that sort of call to action, right? Meet me in the X outside venue has gone away. So massive shift in those sort of publishers, if you like, and the creative work we've had to do there to sort of encourage going online. And then similarly, we've got a number of different initiatives where we're seeing Pokemon Go. The sort of the big sort of things was under London Bridge, and now it's like encouraging in your home environment or close to you. But a few things we have seen, really interesting initiative that happened almost like day 5 of lockdown was this initiative with charities and a number of publishers in the UK. So we sort of had we were thinking ourselves about, what philanthropy concept could we sort of get involved with, and not in like, oh, look at us, this is the right time to do this. It's more around, oh my God, loads of people have been really impacted. We have skills and techniques and technology and all these bits and pieces. How can we bring that together and do something for the good of others, particularly like charities, like funding, and the attention just turned off overnight, right? Simplistically. Yeah, right. So we got together with some publishers. They said to us, we'd like to give away inventory for free. And we were like, interesting. Okay, brilliant. Well, we'd like to give away the use of our platform. And we'd like to give away the creative as it pertains to my division. We'd like to make creatives for free for charities. And then a number of different charities came running saying, can you really support us in ads that can run on your network? And we did that very thing. One of my favorite charities we work with is a UK charity called Make-A-Wish. And the reason I love this is using gamification and gaming for people with severe disabilities as a way of like stimuli and a way of breaking up the day and channeling sort of attention and effort into those sort of environments. And then I was just on LinkedIn one day and I just saw a call out from the United Nations, a call to the creative community. And I'm sure many people on this listening to this session right now will have seen that. And the response has been amazing. So we answered that and said, look, we think playable ads or interactive ads. So what do I mean by that? In a typical advertiser, you would recreate the level of a game. So you can see that ad, have a go, play with it, interact with it, and see if you like it before you go through that process of downloading and all the cumbersome stuff with that. And we've seen that as a really impactful way to give something back, because we picked two of the briefs and we answered it. One is physical distancing. So can you practice using gaming to stay 2 meters apart? You know, when I walk around the streets in London, some people could do with playing that title, I suggest. But similarly as well, there was hygiene as well, using a playable ad to mimic the steps in a really thorough hand wash. And from the data we've seen and running these ads, people are really engaged with them and they're trying and they repeat trying. And I'm sure they're washing their hands better as a direct outcome of that.
It's an extraordinary thing that, I mean, I've seen a couple of those things that you guys have put together, and, you know, just thinking about the washing your hands game, as it were. You know, one of the things that struck me is that is, you talked before about using your technology to make things in different languages, but one thing which is consistent pretty much is a visual language, and the you know, an animation that shows you the actions that you should be doing in washing your hands doesn't need to be in Swahili, you know, or in English or German or, you know, even American English. You know, you can. It is sort of cross-continental, isn't it? You know, that's and good creative that works that way. We have some, you know, some pretty standardized notions visually that we can see that really just relate to our bodies and you know, sort of stickman avatars or whatever, which is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? You know, that really is, you know, creativity and visualization of things that that can add for some very clear messaging. You talked about inventory being made available to you then. So just for clarity, this is games that have got space, effectively media space, within the game or within the preamble or whatever it is. And they're just offering that up. They're saying, instead of you buying this space to put your advert in, you know, we will give that freely to these charities. And how does that work? You know, in a charity sense, if a charity ad goes into that space, do people have the ability to click out and to make a donation or to engage with the charity directly?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that sort of initiative, there's a publisher in the UK called Miniclip and a guy there called Peter, really strong guy that sort of drove this publisher initiative. He's talking about like the 1% initiative. Can every publisher give 1% away in perpetuity? Which is an amazing outcome if that happens. But yeah, absolutely. The charity will come and say, you know, the call to action will be donate, and you'll go off to their site and you will give funds towards that charity of your choice. And we've got, you know, it's growing, the number of, I think we've got 50 publishers as of last night, and I think we've got growing 26 advertisers. And we're looking at ways to really help. You know, it might not be a surprise to you in the charity space that they don't necessarily have the technology to track all that. You know, if impressions and donations are coming in all around the sort of digital and physical things, they don't necessarily have the infrastructure to track where that came from, and they can see that. So we're helping them with that too.
Yeah, sure.
So I think it's a really good thing, and it's, you know, and it's a lot of small charities too, which is cool. I mean, all charities are amazing, don't get me wrong, but the smaller ones struggle for cut through. And I think that's a really important aspect of it too.
It's an extraordinary thing as well, presumably, you know, looking at this space with an enormous reach, with completely global market on many levels, as we said, sort of cross-continental, cross-linguistic reach. I suppose the other element that I hadn't really thought about much before is, you know, in the traditional TV advertising, for example, it's all well and good you go and buy a slot that is a 30 seconds space, you know, in the middle of Coronation Street, or you know, some enormous soak there. You're going to pay a chunk for that media just for the space to put your advert in, but also actually you're going to have to spend quite a lot of money. I mean, you know, I in my past I was in the world of creating TV advertising on the front end, you know, running originally as an art director, but then running studios and all of that sort of thing. It's expensive, and even now, where people can make an awful lot of stuff in the computer, you want to animate a 30-second spot. It's an expensive pursuit.
Very much so.
But actually, presumably that, you know, that is much more accessible from a cost point of view. I mean, obviously, we're talking about charities having free slots, and you guys very kindly giving over free creative for them to put into this slot. But even after that, you know, hopefully as we come out the other side of this, people will have engaged more as, you know, seeing gaming more as a media platform there. You know, what is there a kind of cost differential? You know, am I right in saying it's much cheaper to produce creative for advertising in these slots?
I think in general, yes. I think, you know, in our industry, we don't necessarily charge per se for the creativity or for the building of that. We package that into the media buy, right?
Okay.
So that comes with thresholds, of course, which, you know, we sort of look at. But I do believe that, you know, the friction to work within that environment is less than it might be in a more traditional media outlet, right? And I think, you know, I think gamification historically, going back to what we were saying before, just around like bad a word, you know, a word that might be frowned upon historically, but I think you can see how you can reward people for their efforts, and you can track the engagement, you can see what they're doing, and you can sort of give different experiences around that further down the line, right? So you could get in touch with people and then keep them and keep communicating with them, which I think is really interesting.
So that true combination of, you know, the data, the creativity, and the technology coming all together, not only giving you access to a bigger audience, but actually really driving engagement, you know, and continued engagement, because you can be reactive, you can be agile about how that's working. And I suppose as well, you must pretty well know who it is you're talking to. You know, this is rather, we know the number of people that are sitting down to watch Coronation Street, but we don't necessarily know who exactly they are in the demographic. Whereas in this space, we know a lot more about the audience as well.
We definitely know more about them. I mean, we do, you know, privacy is a huge thing. You know, Apple are really leading that. So we don't know your Pete Bowker age X, Y, Z, right? But we do know certain attributes of an individual, and then we group them, right? But we're very conscious about sort of knowing too much about people, and not sort of, you know, GDPR is a huge one, right, in this sort of world. But yeah, we do know more about people, which I think is really interesting. And predictions around that as well. You talked about algorithms before. You know, I think creativity sort of stands out in a space, because if you are a media buyer trying to reach somebody who wants to play your game, a lot of that is automated. So you can bid, and then there's algorithms that optimize your bids for you, as one example. And we do believe that creative space can be automated to some degree, to your point before, but it's still that pure play. You need ideas, and you need concepts, and you need to use innovative minds to sort of switch it up, else you just get fatigue, right? We all see ads that are just like, oh my God, I've been seeing this for 2 years.
Right.
And it keeps hitting you, you know.
Freshness, you know, because that advertising is still part of the content. You know, it's still part of what's there, and it's got to be engaging. You know, the golden age, old folk like me remember, you know, of TV advertising. Sometimes you'd be really looking forward to the adverts to see what was actually going to happen, and you know, there was a lot of humor and comedy that was involved in it, or you know, just absolutely beautiful filmmaking. You know, and I guess that remains true into this space at all. So what do you think the misconceptions about designing for gaming audiences are, and the kind of missed opportunities around creative for mobile and digital formats? You know, what are people not getting?
Misconceptions, I think. So I touched on it a bit before, just in terms of who's playing games. right? And you just have this opinion that if it's, if you're giving somebody a reward, it's a bribe, which is a notion we've sort of combated ourselves in terms of, media buyers. They're like, I don't want to give someone a reward for engagement. They'll just bribe, they'll just mine the system just to get something. But we don't see that. We don't see that scale. And similarly to that, we think time spent on mobile devices has outpaced all the other channels you're talking about. So it is the right channel, right? I think it's up to, where is it? People are spending more than 30 minutes a day in games. So, when you think of, this has been a phrase that's been used a lot, the top 10 apps you use, like gaming definitely appears there. And like Apple and Google, the app stores would tell you the lion's share of their revenue is coming from games, alongside the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Stravas, so on and so forth, that are like our hygiene go-to apps. So I think it's the audience and the perception of it. And then I also think it's the fact that, gamification isn't necessarily sexy, but I think that we've proven it, the biggest performing sort of ads we see on the network are those interactive playable ads, because you try something before you go through that effort of having to go through the long steps to download it. And when I say long, you're talking 30 seconds, but you've got to click a button and then wait and watch the spinny circle and put your thumb, all the things So I think they're the two biggest areas that it's become more mainstream. And then couple it with the fact that people are interested in gaming now. At GDC last year, this Apple, Google, they're all coming with these products to really tackle gaming. It's all these signals of intent that it's becoming something that people start to believe in and want to play a part in.
Yeah, there's been a sort of a radical development and change in a really quite short period of time. I mean, you're talking about, Vungle less than 10 years old,
Yes.
And even in that time, just radical shifts. So I suppose, for those of us outside the pointy end of that, there are still a lot of misconceptions around that. It's do for the creatives then, if I'm a traditional creative, a graphic designer, an animator, even a creative technologist, to a degree, do I need to know something more? Is there another layer to my course that I need to do if I want to be engaged in, the creativity area within advertising, within gaming, or is there a sort of seamless shift across? I'm not sure how big the team you've got there at Vungle Creative Labs is, but there's certainly quite a few of you guys there now. Are they coming to you from traditional graphic design, from traditional animation, from advertising, or are they a whole new breed?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you have seen the rise of the creative technologist, and it's really fascinating to hire them actually, because they can code very proficiently, but they also have great levels of creativity and that conceptual. I think they all studied at school, whereby not only do you come up with that concept, you also build it and bring it to life. Which when I was studying many moons ago, I wish there'd have been a course just like that. Obviously, you couldn't see forward and stuff, but I think. One thing we do see is, we see a lot of people that send us their TV spot, video, for example, and it doesn't work on our network. It doesn't engage the intended audiences. And we sort of talk about this. This comes into a fascinating area, which we're sort of looking into and pioneering in terms of our space, which is like this engagement taco. So, it's not a new concept. Of course, film's been doing it for years and stuff, right? There's a start, there's an end, and the middle bit sort of you can ignore if you believe the hype. But we've also been looking at the world of neuroscience, because we can track. I always use the phrase behind the canvas, if you like. We can look at where people click and heat maps and so on and so forth. And that gives us really good data, right? But we've been running, and before everyone gets carried away, and this is sort of a terrible thing with privacy, like we invite people in, we wire them up to neuro biometric sensors, and then we can look at what I call the front of the canvas, how people feel, how they respond, where they look, their heart rate, their sort of facial expressions and stuff. And we're using that as an additional layer to sort of marry up our creative concepts and always look to optimize and improve there. And it's a new field. and it's not terribly scalable right now because you need to be in a lab, it needs to be wired up. But it really is a fascinating area, and it's adding an extra depth to our sort of insights.
And the creatives that are involved in that and seeing the reactions. I mean, we're used to in traditional advertising, audience testing,
Yes.
and seeing what people filling on a piece of paper. How did this make you feel when the little girl ate the chocolate bar? This is like a step beyond, isn't it? But the creatives in your studios and in the labs there, this is all just meat and wine for them. Presumably, they're used to this kind of response and their understanding. So, in the same way, that creative technologist who's very used to, can draw and can code, to simplify it. This is again just another area of something to respond to and react to. But that response is still a creative response. It's still, okay, I've learned that. That's how that makes them feel. Right, I know how to make them feel differently. Not, the data says this, as it were. There's still a human response to that.
Yeah, completely so. And to your point, there's 28 of us in creative labs now, mainly line show in London, Asia, and the US. And it is traditional disciplines as well as that creative technology that highlighted one there. We've got illustrators, animators, we've got motion graphic artists, we've got 3D artists, we've got the standard sort of set. As you say, but bringing them together into more, with growth comes a nice sort of problem that you get to work in more, squads, if you like, as opposed to like individuals when you're a smaller and everyone's just headphones on and busy. I'm sure a lot of people sort of relate to that, but you're really seeing that discipline. And people, I think one of the biggest challenges when I joined is like the apprehension, understanding of data. We talked about it before, but it really was a challenge to start with. Be like, look at this data report. People be like, what? I don't want to do that. And you can relate to that too.
But that's blending those squads across, are blending, seamlessly now in a way that they never have done before.
Well, we have dedicated a team that's looking at data analysis and nothing else as it pertains to the creative, right? We're at that sort of point now, and that's wonderful to the creators because you free them up. But they're interested and they want to know what's emanating and what's working, and they're asking those forward questions, and they weren't 5 years ago.
Yeah, right. So how do you think then, mobile gaming, the evolution of game design, how has that impacted the marketing and advertising world's traditional or otherwise? What are the big changes that you're seeing?
Well, I think at a macro level, so 3 years ago, our network was all gaming. When I say our network, all the publishers and all the advertisers were all gaming. It's not the case anymore. From dating apps, music apps, so on and so forth, coming in on the publisher side, but similarly, those advertisers wanting to acquire users, crude term, but acquire users. So we see that shift, and we also know, like, the gaming guys in the big companies like Kings and the Peak Games, and all the games you could look at globally that are huge. They hire really smart, data people, so they know where their marketing budgets are going, and they know what to do, and they know how to optimize it, right, and where to spend at the right times. So you're seeing that, and I do believe, I think you look at the typical funnel, there's a whole world for brand marketing, and we'd like to get into that in a more of a way too. But also there's this blend, I think, and I wonder whether we touched on this before. I wonder if this crisis sort of, we've seen lots of things. Certain things in industries have just elevated themselves or fast tracked themselves by 5 years, if you believe what you read, right? Ecom, bang, all those bits and pieces. I wonder if we see the same thing. Is
it going to, does it in that acceleration process, when I started in the creative industry, computers were something that you wrote an invoice on. There were word processors, really. And then, the internet was in existence, but we weren't all using it. I remember a buddy of mine when I was first working, having the internet at home and doing surfing on the internet, and me just thinking it was the dullest thing you could possibly do, just sitting in front of the screen, waiting for some text to load.
Yes.
Cut to, 10 years later, and, we were making TV commercials, we were doing all sorts of different things, and people were saying, well, you know, this is going to be on the internet soon, and that's going to take some of your budget. Cut to another 10 years later, and sure enough, yeah, absolutely, you know, advertising spend, media spend was going online in a way that, you know, no one really thought about. Is this an acceleration process in terms of that budgets being, because of the reach, because of the targeting, because of the agility and creative response, and that gelling together of all these various different things? Does this do that? Does this stop people? I mean, you know, the outdoor industry, obviously it's quite difficult, you know, when no one's outdoors or no one's, you know, going past your things. You would think the radio is probably doing okay, TV probably doing okay, but actually, if you're seeing engagement in content like gaming going up hugely, what does that do just to spend, and consequently the concentration of the number of creatives working in a particular area? You know, is that?
Yeah, I agree with the way you summarize that. I agree. My sort of philosophy is that we will see a slingshot from this. Is my personal view, and there's sort of read a lot around this subject right now. There's fascinating articles, you know, get sent articles from, you know, this sounds dull, but it's true, from the private equity worlds who are tracking this stuff like hugely, as I sort of intimated on. So we do believe that will be the case. I think there's one step we could do within our particular, the way in which we're sort of delivering ads is, it's still a little bit like broadcast TV. We make a couple of concepts and we traffic it on the network, and we might target by sort of cohorts, but it is a little bit like a TV spot, albeit targeted to a few cohorts. I think we could sort of go on a bit of a journey where we're sort of marrying. So say, for example, you're playing a game and there are 4 characters, and we see you engage and like one character. We could probably jump you certain levels into the game you've just downloaded, instead of you having to go from level 1, for as a random example, right? And I think that could be a really different sort of play in terms of how you just get people to the right places, because it's just more context and you know, relevance there, I think.
And is the sort of brands that are engaging with this sort of advertising, is it currently ubiquitous? Does it play better for a particular product, service, or brand? You know, you spoke momentarily ago about getting more into the general brand, old school wise, I would call it kind of brand awareness space, you know, where you're actually promoting a specific brand rather than just a product or a service. But how does it track? You know, is every brand in the world potentially a beneficiary of this change?
Yeah, I'd argue you'll see some movement there again. I think some of the principles and some of the ways in which we work with more performance-driven buyers are still relevant to that wider sort of play. And I think if you look at online, where you see, you know, this classic industry things, consolidation. I've been talking about the investment coming in, the consolidation will happen. You see what I mean? And all of a sudden, your bigger companies covering more of the funnel, more of the dollars in advertising. And I think we're starting to see that now.
Well, it's interesting times, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating. So you know, finally, really, I'm interested to see what you think the kind of key takeaways are about the roles of creatives, you know, going back to the start, in response to a crisis of this sort of magnitude. You know, we've touched on, you know, we've touched on the fact that you guys and a lot of your publishers are throwing in, you know, in support of charities and, you know, creating messaging. You know, what should creatives be doing? You know, what are the takeaways they should have using your platforms for, you know, for good, you know, in these sorts of crises?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question, and it sort of makes my mind think back to, you know, wartime rhetorics are sort of relevant now somewhat with, you know, NHS Nightingale, Digital Dunkirk, but you also remember like iconic things like Rosie the Riveter, you know, we can do it, or Lord Kitchener, like your country needs you. I mean, it's a bit out there, a bit cliche, but it feels like that sort of time where there's an environment and there's an engaged audience and there's a way in which you can reach those people and sort of distribute and broadcast for good, as opposed to buy my product X. And I've never, I've been working for 20 odd years and I haven't seen this time before. So I'm really sort of excited. And it's sort of, I mentioned it before, but that when the UN wrote that brief to me, it's like the ideal brief for like, what do you mean we can work with the UN and we can use these sort of initiatives and we can sort of build work and help others. And I think that's still relevant now. And I think, we're all in an uncertain world and it's shifting, isn't it? Week by week, so we'll unlock a bit more of pseudo freedom in air quotes. And I think that's a really interesting time to think about what we could do going forward, because we want to have this we don't want it to be like, oh, it was COVID-19, we all did this stuff and then we just go back to how we were before. And that transcends many different things like flying and all so on and so forth, right? I would like to continue, and I know we would as a company, is to keep this initiative available, but perhaps it cascades through different initiatives.
Yeah, it's
going forward.
I mean, it's interesting you say that we at Glug, every year we try and do a Glug for Good project, and the foundation principle is the same. We have a network of tens of thousands of people around the world, the vast majority of whom are creative professionals, and every year we say, right, let's harness the power of that and let's see what good we can do. Last year we did a project which is called Protest by Design, which was all about encouraging designers and creatives to use visual communication, which, as we said before, is incredibly powerful.
Very powerful,
and at putting a message across. And obviously, the people that we engage with and you engage with, on our teams and in our audiences, are very, very good at that. So we had people creating posters that were protest posters in support of the youth climate strikes that were going on. So we made a receptacle, people uploaded posters, and the idea was that people gave freely of their creativity to be used by others who didn't necessarily have those skills to go out and see if they can make some difference. And actually, interestingly, we've got a project coming up. We've been talking about this stuff at Glug, I know we've touched on this before in other conversations. You said, this notion of back to normal. There's some positives actually that can be taken from everything that's gone on. There are some sort of social changes and some opportunities to kind of just step up a little bit and change. And I think we've seen that notion of community, which is extraordinary right the way across all of our society in the UK, and I'm sure this is happening all around the world, where people are coming together and supporting each other. And actually, we've got a working title of a little mini campaign called Forward to Normal. So instead of back to normal, it's what is the positive step? And we'll be issuing a series of mini briefs very similar to the sort of things that you guys have been doing with the washing your hands, little bits of creative response that people can give that can then be broadcast. We should come and talk to you and some of your publishers about it, as find a place for some of this stuff to go out. And I think that's right. It's something you can do. It's something that, we can't necessarily all be an NHS worker or a frontline worker. Yeah. But actually, we can be frontline in our own way, can't we, for creativity? And do you, have you found with your team, with these initiatives that you've done already, are they engaged? The creatives, are they engaged with this? Is this something that you're having to brief them and tell them to do as a boss, or is it something as a community people are getting behind?
No, that's a really good question. I echo everything you say, by the way, and share your sentiments. No, absolutely not. It's quite fascinating, actually. As it's sort of developed over time, you're sort of seeing, a guy in my team became the spearhead from Creative Labs, and people reaching out to him internally within the company saying, "This is really cool. I've never been so proud of the company and being able to do something. How can I play my part?" And and with lines like, "I'll do this outside of my normal job. I just want to play a part." And I think that is exactly the sort of thing that goes back to your point about we're not key workers in that descriptor of traditional, but we are able to act like that and get that same sort of effort reward response. Yeah. And I think that's amazing, right?
It's phenomenally powerful. I mean, I've said this quite a few times over the course of the last year, talking specifically about Protest by Design that we did last year.
Yeah.
Greta Thunberg, not that long ago, a couple of years ago, sat outside the Swedish Parliament striking for the climate. And the thing that made that resonate was the fact that she had a poster next to her that actually explained that. So very, very visual, and frankly, I'm probably being slightly glib about it, but nonetheless, a photograph of Greta Thunberg sat outside the Swedish Parliament on her own without a poster is just a little girl next to a building.
Yeah.
But you add that visual communication and suddenly there's a strong message, and that's powerful, right? That's really exciting. You know, I think that's
and it's still used, right? It's the same poster is used at every sort of place, however long later. It's incredible.
Absolutely, because and again, you take that into a non-linguistic communication, and that's even more global. No one's going to translate a poster, you know, that's just got a very, very good infographic on it that tells you about something positive. Great. Well, I mean, I think that's a really nice positive way for us to finish. You know, there's lots to be taken out. So it just remains for me to say thank you, Si, very, very much. Si Crowhurst, VP of Vungle Creative Labs. This has been Glug's Creative Lunch Hour as part of MediaTel events, Future of Gaming. Thanks ever so much.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.